So imagine this, you're 95% occupied, okay? 5% vacancy, Frank, but you have no money. You're coming out of pocket every month. How is that? Why is that?
Because physical vacancy is completely different than economic vacancy, number one. Number two, you can be 100% physically occupied, and your economic occupancy can be pretty good as well, but your expenses are too high.
And also, you can have 100% occupancy and your 100% physical occupancy and maybe 50% economic occupancy. Welcome to the Ironclad Underwriting Podcast, where precision meets performance in commercial real estate. I'm your host, Jason Williams, and every week we deep dive into the strategies and systems and stories behind rock-solid underwriting. Whether you're a seasoned analyst, an up-and-coming investor, or a commercial real estate professional looking to sharpen your edge, this show is your front row seat to expert insights, emerging trends, and real-world underwriting tactics that stand the test of time and scrutiny. From market assumptions to debt structuring, cap rates to cash flow, we're cutting through the noise and getting to the numbers that matter. So sharpen your pencils and fire up those models. Let's get to work. This is Ironclad Underwriting. Hey, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Ironclad Underwriting Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Williams, and I got my co-host here, Frank Patalano. How are you doing, Frank?
Pretty good, sir. Just got back from a trip and already planning the next one.
Yeah, I am planning one in right about a month from now, and that's when we'll be at Salt Lake City together.
Definitely.
So our last two episodes we've done is basically the real cost of vacancy. And so we're actually going to continue on that. We're doing part 3 today. We already did turnover costs and lease up assumptions, but now let's go into what actually economic versus physical vacancy is. Now, I've talked about this somewhat before in another podcast, sort of like in passing, where physical vacancy is if you have 100 units and 10 of them are empty, you're at 10% physical vacancy, right? Or if you're at 5 units are empty, you're at 5% physical vacancy. So basically take your empty units and put it over your total units. So
it's a nice and easy formula.
Yep. Typically, whenever you talk to somebody, they will give you physical vacancy, especially when you talk to owners. Like, well, it's 90% occupied, 90% occupied. And also I want to say occupancy and vacancy are basically one minus the other. So if you have 90% occupancy, then you have 100 minus 90, that would give you your vacancy. So that would give you 10%. And I said 1 minus because 1% to me as an engineer is 1.0. But I guess those out there who don't think like an engineer, it could be 100 minus the other. So if you have 10% vacancy, 100 minus vacancy, so that would be 90% occupancy. So that's how that works. So pretty straightforward. So imagine this, you're 95% occupied, okay? 5% vacancy, Frank, but you have no money. You're coming out of pocket every month. How is that? Why is that?
Because physical vacancy is completely different than economic vacancy, number one. Number two, you can be 100% physically occupied, and your economic occupancy can be pretty good as well, but your expenses are too high.
Yeah. So, and also you can have 100% occupancy and your 100% physical occupancy and maybe 50% economic occupancy. And how you get that is usually, well, you're going to say something, Frank?
I was just thinking of the concept that, especially with some of these people that had loans with floating rate debt, that even if their physical occupancy is 100%, even if their economic occupancy is close to 100%, they could still be doing poorly on the deal when those interest rates jumped and they did not predict it correctly.
Yeah, but that's a topic for a different day. We're talking about the real cost of vacancy. So
That's true. But I was just thinking overall.
yeah.
On your concept.
So going back to what I said, you have 100% physical occupancy or 0% physical vacancy, but you're sitting at 50% economic occupancy or 50% vacancy, economic vacancy. Because again, 100 minus 50 is 50. So it could be either way at 50%. And so how that happens, and this happened to my mentor on his first property, is he bought a property and the seller's like, I'll make sure this is 100% occupied whenever we close. And he's like, oh, okay, that sounds like a good idea. That way everything's good and we can go in, just go in right off the bat. But what he didn't realize was he was just pulling people in off the street who had no intention of paying any rent at all. So the economic part comes in, and when you don't have residents paying, even though they're living there, the economic vacancy climbs or economic occupancy drops. So, and this is typically it's going to be in your underwriting. It'll be delinquency or bad debt. So where your residents aren't paying the rent they're supposed to be paying, and then it ends up costing you even more because you have to go through eviction process and stuff like that. And depending on where you are, that can get quite costly in time and money. So
Yeah, plus sometimes you're not just paying the rent, you're paying a lot of the utilities.
yeah, especially if it's like an all bills paid, you're
Yep.
paying for all their utilities while they're living there and not paying you anything. So
Yep. You really get screwed.
So okay, so let's suppose you don't have a nefarious seller who's just filling the units with people off the street, but you actually have gone through the screening process and everything, and you have actual residents. And you're sitting at maybe 90% occupied, physical occupied, but your economic occupancy might still be a little low because you're offering concessions. You're trying to entice people to come and live in your building by giving them maybe half month rent, full month's rent, or something like that. So all of that goes toward your economic vacancy as well. So
$99 down.
yeah,
I've seen that before.
now I have. I mean, you can theoretically give some concessions on, like maybe we'll give you free parking or something, and so your parking is actually considered additional income. So I guess it would still be under a concession though as a loss. So it would offset it that way. So you could still do concessions like that, or maybe you give them a free laundry pass for a year where they can do free laundry. Who knows?
Yeah, the concept of concessions, obviously there's short-term ones and there's long-term ones. I like ones that we say they burn off. So and I don't know if we're gonna have a different episode just talk about concessions, so I could leave it right there.
Yeah. Let's see. So let's see. Where did? Sorry, going through my notes. So when you're sitting for agency debt, you have to be 90 at 90. 90 at 90 means you have to be at least 90% physically occupied for at least 90 days. Now, economic occupancy, it does come into play for agency debt, but generally speaking, you have to be 90 for 90. So, what you want to see between like your physical and your economic vacancy is a healthy gap between the two. I typically see maybe about 10%. 10% could be a little bit high in that regard. I mean, ideally, you want them to be zero difference between physical and economic. But really, that only happens whenever you're 100% occupied and you don't have any loss to lease or anything like that. Because loss to leases count against your economic occupancy
Yeah, but you're
as well.
almost always gonna have loss to lease because your rents are static, especially in a market where rents are growing. I guess if rents are stable or going down, then that's different. But
Yeah, because and we've talked about this before. Your loss to leases, people are signing leases and they're locked in for 12 months. And if you're increasing or decreasing rents throughout that 12 months, you're going to have either a loss or gain to lease. So that would offset it. So theoretically, if you're decreasing your rents to get people in and you have someone going in, your economic occupancy could be over 100%.
yeah, could
Which
be.
So
maybe you should give some examples with some numbers of economic occupancy. Like, so even say if we had like a 10 unit, just to help people understand.
so like a 10 unit, suppose you have a 10 unit. Actually I like 100 units better just because
I'll use
it's
100.
easier
That's
for.
fine.
So you have a 100 unit property and you're sitting at 10% physically vacant. So you have 10% units or 10 units unoccupied. Okay. And then maybe you have one resident who's not paying this month or whatever. So that's essentially 11 non-paying units, right? Because you have one guy who's delinquent for a month. So for that one snapshot, you are sitting at 11% economically vacant or 89% economic occupancy. But then maybe you're offering concessions and two other people moved in with those concessions where they get half rent for the month. So you get two at half rent for the first month. So then that's another basically a full unit of not paying. And so that's now 12% economic vacancy. And then maybe you just increase rents. And so now everybody who has been leased up before is now paying less than the market rate. So then that increases your loss to lease. So that increases your economic vacancy as well. And so, I mean, it can, you can get like almost like a snowball effect. When you're accounting for everything, it can get kind of hairy. That's why I have it in a nice tabular form so I can look at it and see, all right, my bad debt or my delinquency, I'm going to assume maybe 1%. And you're assuming when you make that assumption, you're assuming 1% for the whole year or whatever. If you have more than 1%, you probably have a bad business plan and you need to get people who are actually paying rents. Your loss to lease, you probably want to do maybe 1 to 2% just to keep things going around because you're going to theoretically always be increasing rents, maybe every 6 months or maybe annually or whatever. And so you just want to keep track of it that way.
I think most people do
Concession.
it annually.
Well, I mean, our properties they increase rents quarterly, so
Well, we review rental increases quarterly.
yeah. I mean, if we can, we do it quarterly. If we can't, we don't. And then concessions. Hopefully, concessions you're not going to be doing them too much because if you're sitting at 90, 95% physically occupied, you don't really need to offer concessions too much.
Yeah, I like to say that you really don't have any pricing power in the market if your vacancy is higher than the market average, or if you're at less than 90%. It's
Yeah,
like you can ask for as much money as you want at market or above market, but if you're more than 10% vacant, physically vacant, then it's a problem and it shows.
yeah. Another loss that you need to consider when you're calculating your economic vacancy is do you have any model units? And these are units that maybe you have typically you have 100 units. One of them is a model unit. A model unit is where you can show potentially new residents, hey, this is what you're going to get that has the amenities that you'd expect. It has your tile backsplash and your nice granite countertop and all your stainless steel appliances, and it's got your washer and dryer, and it's got the nice flooring. And so when they go into that, they'll see what they're expected to be able to be renting whenever they move in. It's going to be a different unit that they're going to be renting, but that everything else would be the same. So when you do that, you have one unit out of 100 that is not rented. So again, you add that to the list of non-paying units and it increases your economic vacancy by one.
Yep.
Or if you have an employee unit, maybe you have an on-site manager. And now this can get into the weeds and you can do it different ways. You can give them a concession to like pay half the rent, or you can just give them an employee unit that's half the rent. So that is going to be another, what, 0.5%?
Yeah. Well,
So,
if it's one unit, then that's 1%.
well, if it's half rent, it's half a
Oh, yeah, if
percent.
it's half rent, it'd be 0.5%. Yeah.
So So basically, how you calculate your economic vacancy or your economic occupancy is you take your gross potential rent. Your gross potential rent is what you were getting if you're charging max rent for every single unit. So 100 units, say it's $1,000 a month for rent. That's what 100,000 a month.
Yep.
And then you have 10% people not living there, so you can subtract 10,000 right off the bat. You can then subtract, would we say, one bad debt, so that's another unit, so that's another 1,000, so we're at 11,000. Gotten in
Which
two
which is
concessions.
89% occupied,
Yeah,
physically
we're
occupied. So we're
we're
already
at
under the 90.
we're at two concessions at half rent, so that's another percent, so we're at 12%.
Yep, 88.
We have an employee unit at 0.5%, so that's what, 87 and a
87 and a
half.
half. Yep.
And I'm not even going to bring in loss to lease right now, just because, well, let's throw in another percent for that. So 86.5% of economic occupancy right now when we are physically at 90. So that is how you can do the numbers. And that's how you can see the difference between physical and economic occupancies. Um, some red flags to look out for when you're going through a rent roll to see if you have a large difference in economic and physical vacancy or economic or occupancy is if is a balance due column in your rent roll, and it's either a large number or even if it's a non-zero number, that means somebody owes you money that they haven't gotten yet, and so that comes in as your bad debt.
I mean, I would say that having lots of balance due is a bigger red flag. Every property is going to have a couple stragglers. Um, you could even argue that having no balance due might even be a little bit of a red flag because maybe you're not charging enough money since everybody's paying, and
uh
especially if you're above 90% occupied.
so yes, that is a red flag, but when it comes to vacancy, it's that I think a topic for a different discussion. On how to run your business plan, I think, more versus just the real cost of vacancy. Um, if you look at the balances due and compare them to like the monthly rent, and if your balance is due is say over a month's rent, I think that's a big red flag. And that's on the individual basis, not just the overall sum. But you have like a couple residents who have 2 months rent of balances. That means they haven't paid rent for 2 months at some time. Who knows when it was? Usually with the property manager, if they do things right, they pay the arrears first before catching them up to what's current. But I can see sometimes a resident gets, say, $2,000 and they're applying that to their current rent, even though they owe $2,000 from previous, so that's a red flag there. You have to double check into that. So another red flag, and this can go back to what my mentor faced, was if you have a lot of move-in dates like immediately right before closing. So you're not going to know if they are paying or not until you're a month or so in. So you have to just at least consider that.
I think about problems with too many of the units coming up for renewals around low season. That's always a big worry for me. That so for example, there are different markets that have different high seasons and low seasons. But in Rhode Island, typical low seasons, Thanksgiving through Christmas and a little beyond on both sides. And just the concept of you have a cluster that December 1st, you have 29% of your property needs to be renewed the same month.
Yeah. And for my properties, I try to avoid months from November to February. If there's a lease being signed in that period, I'm going to assign them a longer lease or a shorter lease, just so that the end of the lease doesn't fall in that gap. Ideally, I want more than 12 months. So, but when you're going in November, you have to add in what 4 extra months to get out of it. So you're looking at a 16-month lease, and a lot of people won't do that. They might sign like a 13 or 14-month lease to get out of January or February. November is a little bit harder. So
Well, what some people do is they'll charge more for the 12-month lease, and they'll give them a discount if they're willing to stay 2 or 3 extra months.
yeah, that sounds like a concession.
Oh yeah, I didn't say it wasn't, but just the whole concept of, especially if you have a problem with your move-in dates being too much together, sometimes you have to give to get.
Yeah. Um. Also, on your rent roll, if you see notes like payment plan or eviction pending, those could be some red flags because um I know this might sound harsh, but I'm not a charity. I I don't want to give people free room and board. Now, granted, there are some types of investments where you do come in and you are giving your residents like a lot of different things, like low income housing and everything else like that. So you are giving your residents more than what you normally would. But that's a topic for a different day as well. Um, So when you're doing your due diligence, you always want to know what the current delinquency is. So that will tell you what your bad debt is, and that will give you an idea of what your economic vacancy is at least starting at. Um, what is how many units are under eviction, and you have to understand what the eviction process is. If you're in
Which is different in
Texas,
different states.
if you're in it's in different counties of the same state too.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, we don't do counties here, so
So if you're in say North Texas, you can evict somebody and get them out in like 3 days. Once you get a
amazing.
court date, you get them out in 3 days. If they are a professional tenant, they can appeal the process, and that can buy them like 2 weeks or whatever. Maybe if they put in the money to the courts, it can buy them maybe another month or whatever. If you're in California and you're trying to evict somebody, it could take 6 months.
Absolutely.
And so that whole 6 months, you're not collecting rent. You can't rent it to somebody new because somebody's living there. And so that's just a even a longer process. Um,
Squatters' rights are real in some states.
I think squatters' rights are real in all states. It just depends on what the squatters' rights are in
Yeah,
each
yeah, that's what I
individual
was
state.
playing with. Yeah.
Because in Texas, you can have squatters' rights too, but it's a whole lot harder become a squatter legally in Texas than it is in California or New York or something. So
So for numbers, I mean, when we talk about physical versus economic vacancy, what's what's a good number to for the spread?
so I like I said, I typically see I like to see less than 10. If you can get them closer together, that would be good. Um, let's see what a healthy one would be maybe 2 to 4%. Um, typical or maybe not such a red flag, maybe be like 5 to 7. And then if it's over 10%, you definitely want to be investigating why. And you may need to change up your business plan if you still are pursuing this property. Um,
Yeah, we had a property like that. It was a big 400 unit in South Carolina, and the physical occupancy was like 75%. But over the time that we had it under contract, we ended up not buying it. It got foreclosed on by the lender. I could have swore that I had heard 16 or 17% was the difference between actual physical occupancy and economic occupancy.
yeah, that is a huge red flag right there, and that's
Oh
probably
yeah,
why they
it
got
was a heavy
foreclosed.
turn too. They
Yeah,
had units that were down to the studs. They had roof leaking roofs. It was a mess.
yeah. So that is pretty much more or less the difference in economic and physical occupancy. Um, if you want to learn more, you can look me up. I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, whatever platform you're listening to this on. Frank is pretty much on all of those platforms as well.
I got
And
paid by Facebook today. It's very impressive.
Okay. All right. Before I sign off, I want to know more about that. How do you get paid by Facebook?
For I'm an influencer. Got my first
Really?
thing in the mail. Yeah, yeah. Got
Awesome.
my blue. Got my. I mean, it's not enough to pay for the blue check mark yet, but I was just shocked that I saw money.
That's pretty cool. So you can follow the big influencer Frank Patalano on Facebook and
We're bigger on Instagram, but yes, thank you. The cash
and
flow kings.
I guess the check came from Meta, right? Not necessarily
Yeah, yeah.
Facebook. Yeah. So, all right, we'll catch you next time, and we'll deep dive even further into the real cost of vacancy. See you next time. Bye.
See ya.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the Ironclad Underwriting Podcast. If you got value from today's conversation, make sure to subscribe, rate, and share the show. And don't forget to connect with us on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, or check us out at our website at ironcladunderwriting.com for more insights and updates. If you have a question, a deal you're analyzing, or a topic you want us to tackle, shoot us a message. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep your assumptions grounded, your models sharp, and your underwriting ironclad.